This is purely a journalistic point of view. Nothing more has been said in this video other than that of which has been reported by various media sources and backed up with sources seen at the end of this video.
Vince McMahon has always been a fan of larger-than-life wrestlers, as represented by main eventers like Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior in the past, up through contemporary muscleheads such as Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns and Jinder Mahal. McMahon always preferred muscle men on his roster, so it was no surprise when he launched his own bodybuilding organization, the World Bodybuilding Federation. The WBF would last less than 3 years and become known for Lex Luger's first role in the WWF organization and as the venue that launched the much maligned nutritional supplement ICROPRO. Join us now as Behind the Titantron looks at the WBF, where bigger wasn't always better. The WBF's pay-per-view was not bringing in the numbers Vince McMahon had counted on. This led to Vince McMahon bringing in not only TV entertainer Regis Philbin to host the show, but an appearance by Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. The 15th June show would also feature former bodybuilder Don Draper as a judge. McMahon was hoping that this combination of various talent would help boost the show's buy rate. With Vince McMahon orchestrating the show, there was lots of flash and pizzazz on stage. Not only was the pay-per-view held at the gorgeous Trump Taj Mahal, but it featured the production values the WWF was famous for. The show featured pyrotechnics, smoke, and a bevy of beauties. That was just the packaging though. How would the WBF do in its competitive events? The bodybuilding competition consisted of various events. As Connor Heffernan explains, the WBF format was much the same as other competitions, with the first 2 rounds comprising of the mandatory poses and the individual posing routines, with the 3rd round being where the magic happened. Called the entertainment round, it comprised of pre-taped themed videos that spilled onto the stage. Take Danny Padilla's routine, which was inspired by Jack and the Beanstalk. It featured a pre-taped video of Danny as Jack being chased by the Giant, followed by Danny being chased around by the Giant on stage. Remarkably, it wasn't the most bizarre routine in the entertainment round. Heck, check out Jim Quinn's futuristic posing routine. The event saw one body star after another compete, until the WBF's top paid star Gary Stridham entered the scene. When the announcer said, "You've seen the rest, now get ready for the best," fans couldn't help but wonder if the fix was in, regardless of how talented Stridham was. After the judges reviewed their picks, Stridham was announced as the winner, bringing home a prize of $275,000, something unheard of in bodybuilding competition. Although the pay-per-view did not attract the viewers the WBF had projected, the show itself drew a lot of talk, some positive and some negative. The much larger payouts for WBF body stars was seen as a good thing, but some critics questioned the event's legitimacy, pointing out that the top 5 highest paid body stars came in 1st through 5th place. Was the WBF as worked as the WWF? Although the argument seemed to hold some weight, a closer analysis suggests this was coincidence, as some analysts feel Gary Stridham's look and performance blew away his competitors. More important, many of the critics lambasting the WBF's integrity were allied with Joe Weider, a man who we pointed out in part 1 had all but admitted fixing his contests on at least one occasion. Vince McMahon looked ahead as he planned for the WBF's 2nd show the next year. He had considerable time to fix any mistakes and build the event into a must-see pay-per-view. To help familiarize viewers with his competitors, McMahon created the weekly TV series WBF Body Stars. The eclectic show featured body stars giving fitness tips, performing in skits, and doing whatever McMahon hoped would form a bond with the public. However, circumstances beyond his control were about to affect not only the WBF, but his entire sports entertainment empire. A mere 12 days after the WBF's pay-per-view, Dr. George Zahorian was found guilty of selling anabolic steroids to professional wrestlers, bodybuilders, and Vince McMahon. Zahorian, who served as a ringside physician for the WWF, was found guilty on 12 out of 14 counts. According to James Dixon's book Titan Sinking, Zahorian was the State Athletic Commission doctor in the state of Pennsylvania and was known among the boys as the Candyman. At shows in Hamburg and Allentown, he would show up and set up shop, selling steroids to members of the roster. The fallout was inescapable and had an immediate effect. As Bret Hart recalls in his autobiography, as soon as Zahorian was found guilty, Vince called a meeting to let his wrestlers know that starting in just a few weeks, he would voluntarily implement a drug testing policy even stricter than the one used for Olympic athletes. Everyone had to get off the juice. He made it clear this time it would be impossible to cheat because there would be 2 people watching you piss in a cup. Obviously, this was a way to deflect attention away from his WWF superstars. However, what of his WBF body stars, competitive bodybuilders who had no steroid policy? The Weider Brothers IFBB had a short-lived steroid testing program, but shelved it after fans complained of the competitors' smaller size. Rather than tackling the steroid problem directly, McMahon went with a gamma-irradiated distraction: the Incredible Hulk. In late 1991, rumours abounded that bodybuilding great Lou Ferrigno was considering a return to competitive bodybuilding. Ferrigno had famously played the Incredible Hulk in the CBS series of that name for its 5 seasons. His bodybuilding fame included his spot on the documentary Pumping Iron, where he appeared with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Ferrigno shocked the world when he signed with the WBF for an incredible 2-year deal worth $900,000. Many expected Ferrigno to return to the Weiders who he had competed for in the 70s. However, as McMahon had shown in 1990, he was willing to spend whatever amount necessary to win the bodybuilding battle. Ferrigno appeared in every conceivable marketing device available to the WBF. Whether it was pamphlets, posters, or promos, fans were told Ferrigno was heading for a pose down with the 1991 champion Gary Stridham. For a time, it seemed as if the WBF stood for "We Bought Ferrigno," with a different type of Hulkamania being called upon to save the day. There was no doubt a Ferrigno-Stridham showdown had potential if marketed right. However, the stigma of steroids threatened to let the air out of this version of Hulkamania. By 1992, there was no escaping the intense scrutiny bearing down on the WBF to acknowledge its position on steroids. In March 1992, Vince McMahon announced the WBF would be implementing a steroid testing policy. In addition, WBF body stars began airing snippets on the evils of steroid use. Unfortunately, this created a serious issue for Lou Ferrigno. The former Mr. America and Mr. Universe had been out of competitive bodybuilding for some time and only had 3 months to get in shape for the WBF's second pay-per-view. With no anabolic crutch to rely on, things may have seemed hopeless for Ferrigno as he envisioned his Hulk-like physique reduced on stage to that of a puny Bruce Banner. When the Weider brothers offered him the opportunity to pose down at their Mr. Olympia event, with no drug testing of course, Ferrigno quickly bailed on the WBF. With Lou Ferrigno gone, Vince McMahon brought in WCW's muscle man, the total package, Lex Luger. According to Luger's memoir, he was going to ask WCW for a year off from wrestling. He called Vince McMahon and asked him, "What do you think about signing me to a 1-year WBF bodybuilding contract if I can get out of the last year of my wrestling contract with the WCW?" Luger claims he arranged a release from his contract, which still had 1 year remaining. The WCW champion may have lacked for ring skills, but there was no denying his musculature. Although Luger couldn't wrestle in the WWF, he could skirt his no-compete clause by working in McMahon's WBF. WCW wasn't happy when they learned he was going to work in the WBF, but they had no legal recourse. This meant he was going to appear at the WBF event as a guest poser. Unfortunately, Luger was no substitute for Ferrigno, ruining any chance of a potential dream match. Things worsened as body stars were heavily fined and suffering long suspensions for flunking out of their drug tests. As the WBF's second show neared, the drug tests were cancelled, calling into question the program's integrity. If that wasn't bad enough, Lex Luger suffered a motorcycle accident which knocked him out of the second pay-per-view. Things were looking grim for the WBF. The WBF's second pay-per-view was a complete disaster. The show had the capacity to reach 40 million viewers. Instead, 3,000 homes ordered the show, leading some cable outlets to give it a 0 buy rate. Those who did see the show saw a parade of undersized bodybuilders who clearly looked so much different than the year before. Body star Mike Quinn was reportedly so out of shape that the bodybuilding community saw his appearance as one of the worst in history of competitive bodybuilding. Quinn had no choice to appear as he was contractually obliged to go on stage. Vince McMahon's #1 star Gary Stridham looked great though, blowing away the competition and walking away with his second consecutive WBF championship. With the show booked for the following year, Stridham might grab a third title, but there were doubts how much longer the WBF would be around. According to one report, the WBF magazine alone was losing as much as $200,000 a month. The WBF was clearly a failed experiment, but it was more than that. It had become a liability to Vince McMahon and his wrestling empire. As James Dixon suggests in Titan Sinking, McMahon was facing increasing pressure from the media and the federal government concerning the abuse of steroids. While McMahon had quietly been shuffling out muscleheads from the WWF such as the Warlord, Davey Boy Smith and the Ultimate Warrior, he still faced the glaring problem of a bodybuilding enterprise with huge stars and questionable drug testing. In the weightlifting world, cheap reps refers to when muscle fatigue begins to set in or the weight is too heavy. By July 1992, Vince McMahon was struggling to get the WBF off his shoulders. On the 15th July 1992, McMahon phoned the Weider brothers, hoping to obtain their help. Given the audacity of McMahon's declaration of war on the Weiders IFBB, the Weiders had every right to tell McMahon where to go and what to do with his apology. Instead, they agreed to take the WBF body stars back into the IFBB with a remarkably light punishment of a $25,000 fine apiece. The Weiders even allowed McMahon to buy ads for IcoPro in the Weider magazines. This act of generousness was in stark contrast to Joe Weider's reputation for ruthlessness, and it's unlikely McMahon would have acted similarly had the WBF triumphed over the IFBB. Now that he'd found a venue to peddle his IcoPro products, McMahon looked to cut ties with his body stars by any means possible. McMahon told the men he'd signed away from the IFBB and that they were welcome to get gigs anywhere else. Since the body stars were still under contract to the WBF and entitled to payouts for a defunct organisation, McMahon's offer was more of a chance to escape their contracts than generosity on his part. As for the body stars, the 13 bodybuilders who risked a lifetime ban from the IFBB for signing with the WBF were welcomed back at the IFBB's 1993 Night of Champions event. The show featured a bizarre segment where coffins and tombstones bearing the WBF body stars' names were arrayed on stage, with IFBB star Dorian Yates dressed up as a preacher. All had been forgiven and the IFBB was one big happy family again. While Vince McMahon had managed to ditch the WBF, he still faced mounting pressure from the federal government. In 1993, McMahon was indicted on charges of steroid distribution in federal court. However, he ultimately beat the charges, avoiding what could have been a lengthy prison sentence. In the meantime, he continued peddling IcoPro, hyping it heavily on WWF television in banners conspicuously posted at TV tapings and in ads featuring WWF superstars, proclaiming the benefits of IcoPro. In the end, McMahon lost a reported $15 million on his bodybuilding gamble. Despite his failure at launching a competitive bodybuilding league, Vince McMahon would try his hand at another sports venture. In 2000, Vince McMahon announced he was launching his own professional football league, the XFL. Like the WBF, the XFL would fail, suggesting Vince McMahon's energies are best utilized in the WWE. Well guys, that wraps up the WBF episode. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to check out the poll in the top right corner and vote on which episode you'd like to see next. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell icon so I can see you next time with some more wrestling content.